Hello and welcome back. In this video I would like to show you how to tune your mandolin without a tuning machine. You probably have one of these or something similar or an app on your phone, and that works fine, so you think, why shouldn't I use it? Well, there are a few good reasons I can think of. First of all, I think it would be wonderful and liberating if you could free yourself of another machine. We already have so many machines today, so getting rid of one would be nice, I think. And secondly, when you play a concert or you perform somewhere on stage and you have to tune your instrument, if you were able to do that just without a tuning machine, wouldn't that look quite professional and impressive? Well, maybe, but I think to the audience it would look just normal, because that's what people expect. If you compare that to, let's say, a classical string quartet performing or a string orchestra, when they are on stage and they tune their instruments, they never use a tuning machine. You never see that. In fact, if they would do that, then the audience, I think they would laugh. They would think it's a joke. It's just not done. So why don't they do it, and why do you see mandolin players and guitar players use a tuning machine all the time? Is it more difficult to tune a mandolin than it is to tune a violin? It's the same tuning, the same 4 notes. So what is the problem there? Why is it more easy for a violin player to tune the violin? Well, first of all, when a violin player is playing, he can constantly check and correct the intonation, because he doesn't have frets on his instrument. And of course that's what he has to do. If he doesn't do that, he would play out of tune all the time. So that's just constantly checking and correcting in order to play in tune. So if there is something wrong with the tuning of the 4 strings of a violin player can still correct the intonation and play more or less in tune. We cannot do that on a mandolin. We have the frets and we tune, and as soon as we start playing, that's it. There is hardly anything we can do about the intonation. So it is quite important for a mandolin to be tuned very precisely. But what is precisely, and what kind of tuning do we need to use on a mandolin? If we tune it in perfect fifths, that is not going to work. On a fretted instrument we need a tempered tuning. So if you would ask a violin player to tune your mandolin and he tunes it in perfect fifths, you are going to have an intonation problem. So how can we do that on a mandolin? I don't want to explain in detail what a tempered tuning is. You can find a lot about that on internet, but I just want to show practically how you can do it on your instrument. So let's start tuning. First of all, we take the A from a tuning fork and just copy that on the A string. So when you tune any string, tune upwards instead of downwards. It's best to make the string, the tuning a little flat, and then turn it upwards. That gives the best result, and that gives the best stability after it's tuned. So we have the A string, then we do the D string. Now here is the trick. Because you do that, you compare it to the A and you tune upwards, and as soon as you hear I'm there, it's a fifth, that is actually a perfect fifth. In order to have a tempered fifth, you have to tune a little further and further upwards and make it just slightly sharp. But of course it should still sound like a fifth. So it is hardly noticeable, but you will notice that when you just continue turning, that it still sounds like a fifth. And if you go too far, you will hear that's not a fifth anymore. So make it as sharp as possible, but so it still sounds like a fifth. Then you do the same with the G string, and you compare it to the D. So get a little further. Now we have the three strings. Now for the E string, this is different because you compare it to the lower fifth of the A string. So now we have to, when you tune it down and you tune it upwards, you have to stop as soon as you hear a fifth in order to keep the interval as small as possible. So this is the tuning in tempered fifths. If you do this in perfect fifths, it will not sound right. You will hear something's wrong. So this is just to be learned, and you have to recognize the fifth. What I do when I tune, I don't first tune to a perfect fifth and then to a tempered fifth. I turn immediately to the tempered fifth because I'm used to hearing that interval. And actually I use both because I'm a violin player too. So on a violin I tune in perfect fifths, and on a mandolin I tune in tempered fifths. So this is quite easy to learn. This is just a question of getting familiar with hearing this fifth. And if that is difficult for you, it is probably because you've been using a machine and you just tuned every string separately without listening to the interval with the other strings. But it is really easy to recognize this fifth, and you can even use your tuning machine to learn that. If you just tune two strings with the tuning machine and then you listen to this fifth, and the more you hear it, the more you will become familiar with it, and it will be very easy to do it without the machine afterwards. So does that mean you can throw your machine away? Well, no, certainly not, because it can still be useful. For instance, if you have to tune in a noisy environment, or many people are tuning together in an orchestra, then it can still be useful to have the machine, even with a clip-on microphone attached to the machine, and then the machine just hears your instrument. That's difficult to do with your ears, so that's something the machine can do better. Other than that, the tuning fork, this is always for 40 Hertz. So maybe you have to play with a piano or with an orchestra, and sometimes they tune differently and to another pitch. 441, 442 is quite common in orchestras. So then it is useful to have a tuning machine. So before the concert you can just check with the tuning machine if the piano is 440, 441, maybe 439 or something else, and then you know what the A is, and you can take that backstage, and then you know precisely what to tune to. So that in those cases this tuning machine can be very useful. So that's it for now. If you have questions, let me know, and thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.